Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. Right now, I'm pleased to have with me, a legend of Hollywood, Don Murray. And welcome to the show this evening, Mr. Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. It's nice to talk to you.
Okay, now, we were just talking before you came on the show that you're writing a book about Marilyn Monroe and you?
Yes, it's called Marilyn and Me.
Okay, what's the theory of the book, or what's behind the book?
Well, it starts with our lives back in the early 1950s. And it starts with me over in Europe, where I'm in the forerun of the Peace Corps with a group called Brethren Service. And I'm working over there mostly with refugees who are in these barbed wire camps, living almost like prisoners when they've been escaping from the dictatorships of the communists in Eastern Europe and also Franco's fascists in Spain. And it goes on it picks up what's happening in her life at the same time, where she's having the struggle with the studios, trying to get free from the what we call the slave contracts, where you have to do everything the studio wants you to do. Where she struggles with Milton Green, the great photographer, to form her own productions and have some freedom in a creative work. And it goes back and forth between her life and mine. And then it deals with us getting together for the film Bus Stop. And then from then it shows what the effects of my relationship with Marilyn, the effects it has on my life, and also somewhat the effects my being with her has had on hers. And then it goes into the development of the Peace Corps, which would not have happened as it did without Marilyn Monroe.
Now, why do you say the Peace Corps would not have happened without Marilyn Monroe?
Well, the Peace Corps, in most people's mind, is a concept of President Kennedy, but it wasn't. It wasn't his idea. He did create it by presidential decree when he couldn't get it through Congress. And he deserves all the credit in the world for that, because he was the one president that had the foresight and courage to do that. But the Peace Corps' idea came from Senator Hubert Humphrey, who opposed Senator Kennedy, as a matter of fact, in the elections of 1960, when Kennedy was elected. And the way it happened is that after I did Bus Stop, I went from obscurity to suddenly to be somebody who the Democratic Party wanted to present vice presidential candidate Estes Kefauver to a huge union gathering in Hibbing, Minnesota. And I was there just to introduce Senator Kefauver, but his plane was late, so I was asked by the master of ceremonies to make an extraneous speech. And when I asked what about, he said about Hollywood. And I said, how long? He said, I'll let you know. And as I'm walking to the lecture, he says, half an hour. You have to speak for half an hour. Well, I didn't know enough about Hollywood to speak for 10 minutes, much less half an hour. So instead, I talked about my experience in Brethren Service and with the refugees and so on, and what I did with other young volunteers over there. And Senator Humphrey was on the podium at the time, and hearing that, he got the idea, well, why not expand that kind of program like Brethren Service into a government-sponsored program, mainly of young people like us in Europe. And this will be a wonderful way to spread democracy through the world, also helping the people that would be helping, like those refugees. He kept pushing for that and working with me and other volunteers, mainly a fellow named Belden Paulson, who I did a refugee community, a free refugee community in the island of Sardinia, which we created. We bought land over there and took refugees out of the barbed wire camps and built a free community in Sardinia, which became the model for much of the work of the Peace Corps. Humphrey could never get Congress to pass the law. And then when he lost the election to Kennedy. Kennedy picked up the idea and also could not get the Peace Corps through Congress, so he created it by presidential decree.
Let's get back. Now, you're saying that it was because you were in Bus Stop that you became, the overnight sensation. How was it working with Marilyn Monroe in Bus Stop? I mean, that must have been some experience for you.
It was a very, very interesting experience, and it was a new experience for her as well, because this was her comeback film. After a 7-year itch, she quit movies and she moved back to New York, and she went to the actor's studio to study acting, of all things. Here she was the biggest star in the world, and she goes and studies acting as if she were a neophyte just beginning. And Bus Stop was her first film after studying at the actor's studio. So she was bringing the acting methods of the studio, which is basically Stanislavski's methods, in that you actually experience the emotions of the character rather than representing the emotions of the character. You really feel the emotions of the character. Well, it happens to be the same as my training at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And Joshua Logan, as a matter of fact, was the only director that had actually worked with Stanislavski in Russia himself, with Russian art theater. So it was a wonderful amalgamation of my experience in the method, in the reality of acting, of really feeling the emotions of the character, and her first time of using that training that she got at the actor's studio, and also Joshua Logan, who knew how to apply it better than any other director because he had actually worked with Stanislavski himself.
One thing I have to ask you about, because we've got a couple of people in the studio tonight, and two of my buddies from the Civil War Roundtable are here, and I want to ask you about From Hell to Texas, Henry Hathaway. What can you tell us about that movie?
Well, that was turned out to be a wonderful experience for me, because it was a very unusual Western. I played a character who was an expert rifleman that could handle a rifle like a pistol. And I was taught to do that by a wonderful rifleman himself, an Indian named Rod Redwing, who taught me to use it as a pistol, to load it with one hand and to do all sorts of tricks with it that were not just tricks, but they were useful in fighting with a rifle. But my character was a character who accidentally killed a young rancher who had attacked him with a knife, and in defending himself, I knocked the fellow down and he fell on his own knife. But his father and family, were bent on revenge and chased me all over the West, and I'm just trying to stay away from them to avoid not only being killed, but to avoid killing them. But in just trying to get away, they keep dying. Like once I create a escape by creating a stampede of horses, and the stampede kills one of the brothers, and another one I shoot out. Rocks that hold a boulder, and the boulder falls on the man. So it's a guy who is basically like a pacifist, but he also this incredible rifleman that's very dangerous to anyone who goes after him, and that's why he keeps on running away, because he doesn't want to kill anyone. It's a very, very different concept for a Western. And, of course, Henry Hathaway was one of the great Western directors, so he did a wonderful job with it. And I think that, well, the critics called it one of the best Westerns since High Noon.
Really is. Now, we need to take a short break, but if you have a few minutes, we'd love to have you back for talk a little bit more. Welcome back to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. With me right now, our guest is Don Murray, an actor who did quite a few important and serious films that you were doing, and a lot of those were serious movies that meant something, like The Hoodlum Priest. Can you tell us what it was like, or what the movie was about for some of our younger listeners?
I came to describe movies. I come from the stage, of course, from Broadway stage, and Bus Stop was my first movie. And I come from them with the idea of entertainment, but I found that movies were not only art and entertainment, but were also what I call weapons of mass instruction. In other words, every movie carries a message, whether it wants to carry one or not. The message can be just kind of silly kind of comedy, or it can be something of depth, like The Hoodlum Priest, which was a story of a real priest from St. Louis, and his name was Father Clark, and his mission in life was to work with ex-convicts and help them to create a life, a lawful life in the world outside of prison. And that's why he was called the Hoodlum Priest, because he worked mainly with hoodlums. And his main concept was to found a halfway house where these guys could get out of prison and live in a circumstance where they'd have food and shelter, and he would help them find jobs and so on, so they could work themselves back into a normal, non-criminal life. And as a matter of fact, the film was so successful in presenting Father Clark's life and the concept of halfway house that it was the inspiration for over 75 halfway houses in the United States and Canada.
Very good. Now, you had an opportunity to work with James Cagney, directing a film by Michael Anderson, Shake Hands with the Devil. And again, that's a serious film about the conflicts in Ireland, where it's not just an easy choice in what the characters are making.
That's right. As a matter of fact, one wonderful thing about being an actor in movies, rather than the stage, is that you get all these different characters where you go actually to the location where the story took place, and it's an education. Like, I studied what they called the Troubles, the Irish Revolution against the British when they tried to make the Irish Free State, which they were finally able to do. And the story of Shake Hands with the Devil is a contrast of my character, who is an Irish American that got involved in the conflict on principle, and James Cagney, because my character fights the revolution until he succeeds in getting the aim of the revolution, which is a political freedom for the Irish Free State. Whereas Cagney's character is the fanatic, who, when he really gets what the original aim was, wants to go further and wants to go on with all the violence, all the killing. And as a matter of fact, there's a wonderful description of somebody like Cagney. The fanatic is someone who, having lost sight of his objective, redoubles his efforts. That was Cagney's character. And the two fought together, and then, of course, had to fight each other in the end, because the two aims, the two purposes, and the two methods were just incompatible. So we end up fighting each other.
A Hatful of Rain. I mean, that was at the time a controversial subject.
Yes, that was about dope addiction. And dope addiction in the middle class, usually dope addiction at the time was, in the first place, it was not dealt with very much in movies. And then when it was, like in The Man with a Golden Arm with Frank Sinatra, it's in the field of music, where that was the traditional things. You know, like jazz musicians were all, not all, but many of them were into dope. But this was a middle-class man with an ordinary job who happened to become a dope addict because he was very badly wounded in the war, and he was given morphine for his wounds, and he developed an addiction, and he couldn't get rid of it in his own life. And the film shows the effect not only on him, but the effect on his family, his wife, his brother, and his father, how devastating it was to the entire family. And that's what the value of it was, because it took it home to everyone and said, hey, look, this isn't just these people's problems, not just problems of the poverty-stricken or the problems of musicians, but it can be a problem in every household. And of course, that's common today. We know every stratus of the social structure of the country has a drug problem. And that was the first movie that really dealt with that and that aspect of it.
And I mean, we don't have time to talk about it, but One Man's Way, Norman Vincent Peale, Advise and Consent, and I don't think anybody could even name all the great actors that were in that film. What was that experience like, Otto Preminger?
Well, that was a wonderful experience because we not only made the film creatively with Preminger, who was a wonderful director, but we made it in Washington, and we were with all these politicians, and we were spending almost every day with them. Like we had lunch with President Kennedy and Jackie at the White House, and just 11 of us around a table for a couple hours, and then with Jackie, she showed me through the White House and showed me how she decorated and so on. And we really got to experience what it was like to be a senator because we were everywhere that they were. And we were dealing with its kind of real problems that they dealt with. And so that was a fabulous experience and was such an education for me as well as a great artistic experience. And then One Man's Way, of course, Norman Vincent Peale, was not only one of the greatest people I've ever worked with, but one of the most humble men I've ever seen. He had no conceit at all, and he was so grateful for everything that you did in presenting his ideas. And then the other films that I've done, most of them had similar kind of themes in the sense that they were dealing with some kind of a subject that was important to most people's lives, and that's one of the delights of being in films that I never experienced on the stage.
One final question. If you had to pick a film which you're most proud of, your performance, or the film as a whole, what would that film be?
Oh, it'd have to be The Hoodlum Priest.
The Hoodlum Priest. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the book, Marilyn and Me, when is it going to be coming out?
Marilyn and Me, it should, I'm going to finish it sometime this winter, and hopefully it'll be out sometime next fall.
Okay, so if you can promise to be on our show next fall when the book comes out, we'll say a few more words about it, and maybe we can get to some of the films we didn't get to tonight.
Well, that would be great. I promise you if you promise me.
Thank you, Don Murray, one of the legends of Hollywood, and a man who made serious films.
Thank you.